After analyzing capitalism and the institution of property and thoroughly critiquing existing arrangements, Proudhon put forth his own idea of an alternative system that he believed would be much better than capitalism. Proudhon's proposed system is called Mutualism. First, we must note that Mutualism, as espoused by Pierre-Joseph Proudhon, is quite different from the neo-mutualism espoused by Clarence Lee Swartz and Kevin Carson in the United States. Neo-mutualism is associated with the ideals of groups like the Center for a Stateless Society. These neo-mutualists synthesized Proudhon's views with market anarchism as espoused by Benjamin Tucker, and they largely came to reject a lot of the most essential ideas put forth by Proudhon. I will talk about the neo-mutualist trend in anarchism in a future video when I discuss individualist anarchism, but I will not cover neo-mutualism in this series on socialism. As you may recall from the previous video, Proudhon's critique of property was also a critique of banking arrangements, or banking practices, I should say. Thus, his solution to the problem of property is multifaceted and involves not just changing the system of property as such, but also reforming banking institutions and practices in a fundamental way. Many of the problems which capitalism many of the problems with capitalism seem to be linked to banking and lending. In the general idea of the revolution in the 19th century, Proudhon makes the following assertion. The revolution has two things to accomplish about property: its dissolution and its reconstitution. Proudhon advocates the democratization of the central bank, not a national bank, but a literal bank of the people. He also argues that the banking industry ought to be opened up to free competition from credit union type mutual banking associations. He argues that the money monopoly should be abolished, by which he means that the special status of gold as money ought to be overturned. Gold was recognized as legal tender in Proudhon's day, but that meant that the possessors of gold had an advantage over everyone else. Gold is just the product of one industry, the gold mining industry. Why not allow for the monetization of the products of all industries? So Proudhon says in his philosophy of poverty that the means of destroying this formidable force that is the money monopoly does not lie in the destruction of the medium, but in generalizing its principle. Basically, you have to destroy the monopoly status that gold has in the sphere of money, and allow other things to be used as money. So allow for the issuing of notes to represent the product of any industry, not just the product of the gold mining industry. So in Proudhon's estimation, this competition would force down interest rates nearly to zero. Interest is the price of a loan. When free competition forces down the price of a loan, it will reduce the interest rate to less than 1%. Then Proudhon suggests that government debt should simply be written off by refinancing government debt at this new low interest rate. This would mean that the state would no longer have as much of a need to tax citizens for revenue. And keep in mind that Proudhon also calls for the complete abolition of the state. However, like Marx, Proudhon believes that the state does have a transitionary role in the interim between capitalism and libertarian socialism. Proudhon was a member of the French Parliament, and some of his most important libertarian socialist proposals were first put forth as legislative proposals to be approved by Parliament. So here we have the irony of an anarchist politician trying to bring about anarchism through electoral politics. The first big step in solving the problem of property is to ensure that land and buildings are relieved of mortgages. Proudhon holds that the cultivator or tenant must be granted the right to the value of improvements to the property. He also suggests that each rent payment made should confer a greater share of ownership to the tenant until the original proprietor is deprived of any share of ownership. All rental agreements shall be converted into rent-to-own arrangements. Proudhon makes kind of puts forth a platform in or a proposal in the general idea of the revolution in the 19th century. First, he says that all payments made as rental shall be carried over to the account of the purchaser of the property at a price estimated at 20 times the annual rent. Second, that the property thus paid for shall pass under the control of the town administration, which shall take a first mortgage upon it in the name of all the tenants, and shall guarantee them all a domicile in perpetuity at the cost price of the building. 3. That proprietors who occupy their own house shall retain property therein as long as suits their interests. 4. That farmers who pay rent for the use of land shall also receive a share of ownership of the real estate. 5. That when the property has been entirely paid for, it shall revert to the town, which shall take the place of the former proprietor, and shall share the fee simple and the economic rent with the farmer. 6. That once all the landed property is fully paid for, the towns shall become the landlords, and the rental payments will begin going to the municipality rather than to the private landlords. And 7, after 20 years, all land will have been paid for, and all landed property will have passed into the hands of the municipalities. All the towns of the Republic shall come to an understanding for the equalizing among them the quality of tracts of lands as well as accidents of culture. And finally, once everything has been equalized, the tax on land shall be abolished, and the rural police will be passed under the control of the municipal councils. The municipal councils will be run on a more directly democratic basis. All the municipalities in the Republic will be autonomous, but they will be confederated into one association of municipalities. Proudhon ends up proposing a sort of municipal socialism in which the municipality confiscates economic rent and presumably either redistributes it or uses it for public purposes. This effectively leaves the workers of the land and the tenants as proprietors who no longer have to pay rent to landlords. However, it must be remembered that the municipality or town would be restructured along anarchist lines of free contract, confederation, and direct democracy. Proudhon rejects majoritarian democracy, asserting that the law of the majority is not my law, it is the law of force. Hence, the government based upon it is not my government, it is the government by force. That I may remain free, that I may not have to submit to any law but my own, and that I may govern myself, the authority of the suffrage must be renounced. We must give up the vote, as well as representation and monarchy. According to Proudhon, we need to take Rousseau's idea of the social contract to its logical conclusion. We need to rebuild society on the basis of free association and voluntary contract. Individuals must freely associate and enter into voluntary agreements. Free associations of individuals considered as moral persons could then freely federate with other organizations. This could become the basis of all industrial organization and for all political organization. The legitimacy of the municipal government would ultimately be predicated on consent and consensus. All property and land and buildings would be transferred over to the control of the town administration, but the private owners of the land and buildings would be consenting participants in the municipal government. There would be no government apart from or above the people. Government would become more directly democratic. For Proudhon, restructuring government does not go far enough. The economy, like the government, must be democratized. The workplace, like the political arena, must be restructured in an egalitarian and directly democratic fashion. Proudhon would have advocated replacing hierarchical capitalistic corporations with egalitarian working men's associations or workers' cooperatives. To Proudhon, it is fundamentally unjust for society to be divided into two industrial classes of masters and wage workers. Thus, capitalistic hierarchical forms of industrial organization need to be fundamentally restructured. And Proudhon wanted these new working men's associations to be egalitarian, democratic, and cooperative, owned and controlled by the workers themselves. If a person wants to start a small business or practice a small craft, then Proudhon says that there is no reason for association unless for individual preference. So Proudhon allows for individualistic appropriation when production is done individualistically. However, this is not the case with industries that are more collectivistic in nature. Industries that require a large number of employees, the use of machines, and the division of labor generally become hierarchical, so that workman is subordinated to workman, man is dependent on man. In such industries, there are two possibilities. Either the workman can be a mere employee of some capitalistic proprietor, or else he can be an equal partner, an associate. And Proudhon does not hesitate to tell us that all workers should be equal partners in industrial endeavor, and that all such industries which carry on production through the division of labor ought to be restructured as free associations with all workers as equal partners in the ownership of the industry. Proudhon's mutualism is based on the idea of reciprocity and what the American anarchist Josiah Warren referred to as equitable commerce. According to Proudhon, profits constitute a form of usury that is tantamount to theft. Mutualism is a form of anarchism that entails markets, but the markets under mutualism will be fundamentally cooperative and socialistic. According to Proudhon, the democratic society will have a universal and tacit agreement to renounce increase, that is to say, to sell and pay at the only just price, which is the average cost. Unlike American market anarchists such as Benjamin Tucker, who thought that pure competition would force prices down to the cost of production, Proudhon thought that such equitable commerce would be brought about not by market processes, but by formal agreements between buyers and sellers. He held that there should be special formal agreements between enterprises to sell their products and services at cost of production, and that each working men's association should have its books and records published so that they can be held accountable. He also held that companies, now reconstituted as associations, should state the basis of their basis of their prices to demonstrate that the price accurately reflects the cost of production. Profit would thereby be abolished, and all exchange would be relatively equal. Neither party would benefit at the expense of the other. Furthermore, Proudhon thought that the community ought to have the right to dissolve any company or association, and also the right to exercise control over companies. Here we see that there is an implicit public ownership or control of industrial and or public control of industrial and commercial enterprises to some degree under Proudhonian mutualism. Proudhon puts forth the idea that working men's associations will be formed and ruled by a double contract. They will have a contract with the mother country on the one hand, and a contract binding the various members of the association together on the other. The contract with the greater community will require the company to sell all goods and services at the cost of production, or as near to cost of production as is possible. The contract between the individuals within the association will, 1, give everyone within the association an undivided share in the property of the company and a right to fill any position of any grade in the company according to suitability and length of employment. 2, guarantee to provide quality education through apprenticeship within the organization and guarantee sufficient income to the members. 3, make all the positions within the association elective and make the bylaws of the association subject to democratic approval by the members. 4, ensure that the pay is proportional to nature of the position and to the extent of the responsibility. 5, mandate that each member shall participate in the gains and in the losses of the company in proportion to his service. 6, mandate that each member is free to leave the company and that the company may take in new members at any time. Thus, Proudhon had a vision of libertarian socialism that would abolish the rule of politicians by thoroughly democratizing government, replacing the state with directly democratic free associations at the municipal level, with these free associations freely associating into a large democratic federation at the national level. Furthermore, he envisioned the abolition of the reign of landlords by replacing private property in land with public ownership in which the rent would be collected by the municipality. And finally, he sought the abolition of the rule of bosses and employers by turning all large companies and enterprises into workers' cooperatives that would be both democratically owned and democratically managed. I should mention here that Proudhon's model basically has 2 tiers of ownership. Private property is simultaneously abolished and preserved. The Tier 1 owner of all property and enterprise is the community as a whole. The community collects rent for public purposes, meaning that the community is the ultimate landlord and owner of land. However, the occupants and users of the land basically have ownership at a Tier 2 level, provided that they pay the rent or property tax to the municipality. The title to the land is theirs. They can pretty much do with it what they want. At the same time, the ultimate Tier 1 owner of industry is the community as a whole, which the community as a whole reserves the right to regulate and or abolish any enterprise. However, the workers themselves in free association enjoy the Tier 2 level ownership. The profits of the enterprise go to the workers of that enterprise. The profits are divided amongst the members of the Working Men's Association.